Good morning and welcome to Harmony Knows webinar, Cybersecurity Risks and What You Need to Do to Be Prepared. My name is Mary Tressel and would like to walk you through how to use your webinar pane. So you'll see in your upper right hand corner of your screen a little orange arrow. If you have questions for our presenter during the webinar, please type that into the box and hit the send button and we will respond to those questions as time permits at the end of the webinar. Reminder here with our audio settings, when you entered the GoToWebinar platform, it chose an audio option for you. If you want to switch, click that Choose an Audio Option button on the left-hand side of that pane, and then you can select computer audio or phone call, whichever works better for you. I'd like to introduce our presenter today. His name is Steve Schaffner, a senior manager in our consulting practice. He has a Big Four experience and then spent several years in the internal audit and compliance department for large corporations. He's run his own consulting practice and then he has returned to us in public accounting. And Steve's got a lot of experience around cybersecurity, which he's going to share with us today. Reminder also, to qualify for your California CE, you must be using a personal computer, no smartphones, and log in with your own information and unique URL. You must be logged into our online software for at least 50 consecutive minutes within the scheduled time frame of the webinar. Actively respond to at least 75% of the polling questions and complete the evaluation survey at the end of the webinar. Our agenda today is why you should care about cybersecurity, understanding typical hacking exploits, cybersecurity strategies for protecting your organization, how to report breaches, and then some resources. In our learning objectives, today you'll learn how to define cybersecurity and why it matters to your organization, understand who the hackers are from yesterday compared to today. We'll just outline typical hacking exploits, and identify cybersecurity strategies to protect your organization and report compliance to auditors and regulators. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve Schaffner.
Thank you, Mary. So we're going to start by defining cybersecurity, and this is the definition on Merriam-Webster, which I just learned was highly trended in the debate the other day. But the word cyber, what does it mean? If you look it up, it's of, relating to, or involving computers or computer networks. So what that means then, when you apply it to cybersecurity, is that cybersecurity really just means computer security or network security. So I always find this interesting because cybersecurity is the hot term right now. I do a lot of work with the San Francisco chapter of ISACA. We plan a lot of educational events, and we joke that if we want to get the seats filled, just put the word cyber in there somewhere and people flock to it, because they perceive it as this new different thing. But as you look at the definition, it's really not new. Now that said, there is some new twists to cybersecurity, and that's what we're going to talk more about. It really gets back to technology, right? Technology is evolving. If you think about when it really started going big, maybe in the 1970s, we rely on computers to a great degree. They've become more complex, and the ownership of them has become distributed. That, therefore, makes it very difficult to try to manage and operate and really understand things from end to end. It's good because it helps us be more efficient and effective. That's why we have them in our businesses and in our personal lives. But the bad guys also have learned to use it to their advantage and be more efficient and effective in what they do. And it also lowers their risk profile. So this next slide that's coming up is a map that you can find on T-Mobile's website. I have the link down at the bottom. And what this shows real time is where are the exploits coming from and going to? Where are the hackers and where are they hacking? And if you look on the left, there's some tiny little slides on there, but it shows that China is the #1 hacking nation, followed right behind with the US. We get a silver medal. And then after that, Vietnam, Russia, Korea, Germany, and Romania. That's the advantage of hacking today and why it's different than other ways of criminal activity. In the olden days, quote unquote, if you wanted to steal something and somehow monetize that, you had to break into somebody's building and steal whatever the thing is and then sell it. The risk that you bore in that scenario is that you could get caught, right? You're right there and they could catch you. Now you can sit on the other side of the world and hack in to steal data, which you can monetize. And there's kind of two advantages. One is you're not there physically in person, so you don't bear that risk. But two, you can also steal it and the data remains. So the risk profile of being a criminal in this way has just really made that an attractive option. So let's think about that for a minute. Who are the hackers? In the old days, we used to think of the geeky teenager. They'd sit in their room, they're looking for trouble, and that, you know, they would just go hack into whatever they could for fun. Criminals got involved. We just talked about that. And the criminals have figured out ways to monetize it. And the image that I have on the slide right now is what most people think of when we say criminals. But the reality, let it refresh here for most, here it goes. The reality is that the criminals that are hacking today are kind of like you and me. They dress up in a suit, they go to work, they punch in, they were recruited out of college, they take holidays, they have company parties. In some of these countries, hacking is a standard profession. And they're very good at it. That's what they spend their days from morning till evening figuring out how to hack us and profit from it. And they've made a business-driven science out of it. So right now, let's pause for polling question number 1.
Thank you, Steve. And so the first question is, does your organization have a cybersecurity strategy? So you can select one of the options here. We do not have a cybersecurity strategy. We have one, but not many people are aware of it. C is we have one, but it needs improvement. And D is we have a formal program with documented procedures. So we're going to allow everybody a chance to select the answer that best fits your organization. And also, we got a question in about copies of the PowerPoint slides. And yes, you will receive a link to the recorded webinar and a copy of the PowerPoint slides within 2 days of this webinar. So you can look for that in your inbox in a couple of days. But with that, I think we've had most of the people vote, so we're going to go ahead and share the answers with you. So Steve, it looks like it's a good spread of responses here.
Yeah, it looks like most people have voted in B or C. So they either have one and people aren't aware of it, or they have one but they recognize that it needs improvement. A, which is we do not have a strategy, was a third, followed by D. So that's kind of where we see a lot of people is they have something in place, but either people don't know about it or they need to improve it, and that's kind of on par. So let's talk about what are the bad guys after it. This next slide here, this is showing what most people are already aware of, right? They want your social security numbers, your bank account numbers, credit card numbers. The whole point here is that they want to monetize what they're stealing. So oftentimes they'll steal a credit card, they'll make a couple of very small purchases to see if you notice. And if you don't, then they'll either go big with it and know that it's going to get canceled right after, or some of the bad guys are being really smart and they just keep trickling in $5, $10, $20. For a lot of people, they don't really check the detail of their statement, and that goes by for a long time. If you can multiply that out by 1,000 people, you're getting away with a good chunk of money. The last bullet on here, the last main bullet, is the proprietary information. I like to refer to this as your company's secret sauce. A lot of times the hackers are getting in to grab that, and then they use it for their company or another company that has hired them. But they're trying to give you a competitive advantage. So they're still monetizing on it, but they're taking a bit of a different approach to do that. Now that's historically what they've been after. What's the twist today? And this is why I think cybersecurity is really hitting the mainstream these days. There's phishing, spear phishing, and whaling. I think a lot of people have heard the term phishing, and you see it spelled with a PH. And I give some brief definitions of what they are here. Phishing are those emails that we all get, right? Somebody's in Europe and they lost their passport or their visa or something. It's always one or the other, and gosh, they need you to help them out. Can you just send them some money? It's a widespread email that gets sent to everybody, and they're just seeing who they can hook and who they can get the money out of. Spear phishing is a little bit different. That's when they come up with a similar attack, but they target a company. And so they may send an email, and it's going out to everyone in the company, And it looks like an email from the people in the company. It's got the right footer. It's coming from the right kinds of people. And it says, hey, we just updated the org chart. Click here to see it. And once you click, now you've downloaded a piece of malware or a virus, and that's going to start doing some bad things. We'll talk more about that in a slide or two. Whaling takes that even more targeted. So we've actually seen some clients where the bad guys, remember, these are people that put on their suit and go to work from 9 to 5. They spend a lot of time researching a company. They know who the CEO is, the CFO, all the major players, and they oftentimes can be aware of deals that the company is working on. So we've seen some pretty sophisticated emails where somebody in HR gets an email string. It's from the CEO. It's in the right tone at the right level with the right footer and all the normal email appearances. And they're forwarding an email string between the CEO and other key officials within the organization. And they're discussing this deal. And now the person in HR or somebody else gets this email string from the CEO saying, hey, the deal is coming through. Please wire a large sum of money to this place. And I've seen it range from $350 to millions of dollars. And the people get it and they say, well, it's from the CEO, and yes, it's that deal I know we've been working on, and they wire it away. Off it goes. So if you think about it from some of those countries we looked at where the economy is not so strong, boy, if you can spend an entire year trying to figure all this out and you get one of these emails to work and you walk away with $500,000 or $1 million, you've just set up your salary for the next 5 or 10 years. Or you can set up a company and now you're employing a bunch of people. But the point is, you don't have to have a high success rate to be successful if you live in those parts of the country. The other big thing that we're seeing a lot of is ransomware. So in this case, maybe you got one of those spear phishing attacks and you clicked on it and it loads a piece of malware and you're not even aware that it's there. It's just there and it's working in the background. And malware can do a lot of things. It can collect data and send it back to the person who created it. It can take over your system and allow the perpetrator to use your system to do other things. In this case, if you clicked on something, it downloads the malware, and what that malware does, it encrypts all your data in the company, or it changes all of the passwords so that the perpetrator now owns that. And what they can do is basically shut you out of your system or shut you from accessing your data, and then they send you an email and say, hi, here's it. You may have noticed you can't access your system now. That means your entire company's operation is down, and I'll gladly give you access to it again if you send me $25,000 or 50 or whatever the number is. A lot of companies look at that and they look at the loss that they have and they go, you know what, the easiest answer to get back in business is send the money. So they do. The only downside is you have back access to your system again for a month. And then it's shut off again and they send you another note. Say if you would like access to your system, and this continues. Now the key here, and this is probably one of the slides I'll spend the most time on today, the key here is that when they go in and they encrypt your data or they take command of your passwords, they don't always change them right away. They let that fester and go on for a month or two. And that puts you at a disadvantage. Because if they've encrypted your data, one easy solution is you figure out how it got in, lock them out, erase your machines, and then restore from a backup. But if it's been 2 or 3 months, can you go back and recover 2 or 3 months worth of your data so that you're back in business as of today? So there's a concept of assessing your risk and determining a couple of key factors. You hear them in BCP, which is business continuity planning. It's your recovery point objective and your recovery time objective. That's kind of the topic of a business continuity webinar. We do those from time to time, so we may have it come up.
We can email out a recording of that if anyone's interested.
Yeah, from the last one. But the key is those stats or those metrics help you determine how long can you go before you just can't recover your data for whatever reason, if it's a disaster or if it's been taken ransom by these bad guys. All right, so this next slide coming up here, this has some of the scary statistics, and this is current. This is from 2016. So 20% of companies surveyed say that spear phishing is their top threat facing their company. 38% of cyber attacks were from spear phishing. 84% of companies surveyed have been successfully spear phished. and 15 reported a decrease in stock price as a result. Other impacts on the right-hand side, there's a 43% loss of employee activity, or they report 43% of respondents had a loss of employee activity. 32% had financial losses, 29% had damaged their company reputation, and 27% had damaged their brand reputation. So if you think about it, the keys here for me is 84% of companies surveyed had been successfully spearphished. That doesn't surprise me a bit. How many people have received an email around the holidays when there's a lot of purchasing going on, and you get an email from UPS saying, click here to get the status of your package, or there's been a status change on your package, click here to see what it is. They don't say what the package is, where it's coming from, or where it's going to, but most people are shopping online around that time. You click the link, and what it does behind the scenes is really tricky. You click the link. By you doing that, you've initiated the transaction of downloading the malware, so it gets it onto your machine, and it immediately forwards you to the UPS website. So as far as you know, you go to UPS and you log on, and you don't see any status change. You don't know what they're talking about. That's weird. You move on. And when if you're smart enough to look at the URL, you went to the UPS website, so you're none the wiser. And now you've got this thing living on your machine that can do a lot of different things. And then, I gave the example already of, hey, there's been a change in the org chart. Click here to see it, and it looks like it came from your company. Another one I've seen often is, hey, we've shuffled the offices. If you'd like to see who's going to be in which cubicle in the office, click here. It does similar types of things. So 84% of companies being successfully spearphished doesn't surprise me a bit. And the rest of these, the loss of productivity, you have to identify this, you have to clean it up, people have to wait while that happens. The loss of productivity and the damage to your reputation and stock value doesn't surprise me. But here's an additional twist on it. The same study said, what is the average cost? And when you incorporate all those things, the downtime, the loss, if you breached confidential information, now you have to pay for that security monitoring. It's $1.6 million per spearphishing attack. How many have you been subject to in the last year? It adds up pretty quickly. Now, this next slide as it comes up is highlighting that it's not always about money. Sometimes the bad guys just want to raise an ideology. So if you think of Anonymous, We Are the 99, the other causes that they've supported, they're not looking to monetize this. They just want to get their message out into the news, and they disrupt the normal way of things, and that's how they accomplish that. Another one is terrorism and war. If you look at the news article that I clipped and pasted in here, it's talking about Stuxnet. Stuxnet is the first known militarized piece of malware. A lot of people have it. You are very likely to have this on your machine, either work or home. It's a worm that was created and we don't know. People had to reverse engineer this, so there's a lot of smart people who have looked at this, and this is what we believe. But we understand that the U.S. Army and the Israeli Army got together, and they were very concerned about the Iranian nuclear program. And so they created this worm, and the worm moves around like most worms. We click on it, we do the things I've been talking about. But if it gets on your machine, it doesn't do anything because it was very smart. It was targeting specific IP addresses in certain geographies of the world, and it would only activate if it got on certain types of processing equipment, specifically the controllers that ran the Iranian nuclear enrichment program. So to enrich uranium, you have to put them in a centrifuge. The centrifuge has to run at a certain RPM, a certain speed, and whatever it was, this virus would get in there. Once it found out it was on that device, it would speed up the centrifuge and then slow it down and then speed it up. And these centrifuges are very sensitive, so when you do that, it would break the centrifuges. It would waste the uranium and it would waste the equipment. And it was also smart enough that as it's doing that, the dashboard that people were monitoring to monitor that whole program, it was reporting that everything was fine. So it really made a big impact on the Iranian nuclear enrichment program. But by being discovered, it also set a blueprint, as this article says, for other hackers to attack other countries. So this one's talking about the U.S. is vulnerable from similar types of attacks. If you think about how systems monitor water systems, power systems, traffic systems, air traffic systems, there's a lot of really important systems in our country and around the world that are subject to this type of attack, and it's not going to surprise me a bit if we see more of these in the future. So now let's understand what is a typical attack. So we've talked a lot about spear phishing and ransomware, and I've described those in pretty good detail, and that's where the biggest risk right now is. What this is going to describe, this next couple of slides, is the good old-fashioned kind of hacking attack and how the hackers get into your network. So if you think about your network, you can think of it as a city with a big fortress wall around it. And to get into the city, you have to go through a gate, right, or a couple of gates. When it comes to IT, firewalls, routers, switches, and servers, and your laptop, they have these things called ports on them. And you can think of it as many different doors that you can go into or out of the city from. There's about 65,000 plus on any of these devices. So the way the hackers typically approach a hack in the good old-fashioned way is they run a scanner, and what that scanner does is it basically goes around and it knocks on each of those doors. It says, door number 1, are you open? No. Door number 2, no. Door number 3, yes, you are open. Okay, let's take a note of that, and it keeps going until it gets through all 65,000 plus. Now you have a list of which doors are open, and there's different types of exploits that you can do depending on which door it is. For example, all internet traffic goes through port 80 or sometimes port 8080. All outbound email goes through port 995. All inbound email comes through port 425. And there's others. Different applications use different ports. So once you know which ones are open, which ones are being used, sometimes there's ports that are open that aren't necessary for whatever that server is doing. Now the hackers can look at it, and you can Google this stuff. You see port 80 or whatever, port X open, and you Google port X exploits, there's information out there about this is how to exploit that and get in. So you do whatever the Google tells you to do, you get in, and now you're inside. Now you run a scan from the inside and say, okay, now what servers can I see? Let's run a scan on those, knock on all the doors. Which ports does it have open? And depending on what you find, you do a Google again if you don't know, and you figure out how to get there. So a typical hack in the good old-fashioned way is basically taking one step at a time. All right, you look around, what can I do? You get in. You look around, what can I do? You exploit it, and you take another step until you get to the data or until you get to whatever it is that you're after. Now, once you get in and you get there, this next slide talks about what they do. They can encrypt your data so they can hold it for ransomware. They can install malware, and that can do a couple of different things. They can listen and learn and wait for an administrator to log in with a password, and now they know that. Or they could just monitor for emails going back and forth. So if they want to understand what do your email footers look like within the organization, what major projects are you working on, so then they can launch one of those whaling attacks and hopefully get away with a big sum of money, and I gave that example earlier. The other thing they can do is install malware that just allows them to take over your machine. So there is a thing out there called a denial of service attack, or it's referred to as a DDoS. And that's where they take over millions of machines around the world, and if you're anonymous and you just want to get a lot of attention, you focus all of those machines to hit somebody's website all at the same time, and that organization's website can't handle that much traffic, so it brings it down. If you're a bank, nobody can get online and move money around and check their balances or all those types of things. That's highly disruptive, and this malware can be used to that end. Oftentimes, you may have this malware on your machine, you don't even know it. It's your laptop is just running slow that day because all this activity is going on in the background. So companies need to monitor for evidence that this is going on so they can address it. So now we get to polling question number 2, and I'll hand it back to Mary.
Thank you, Steve. I'm wondering if that's what sent Southwest Airlines systems down a couple of months ago. So,
things that make you say,
so how vulnerable is your organization to the spear phishing attacks? So please, again, select the answer that is closest to your organization. So A, you're at absolutely no risk. B, relatively small risk. C, moderate risk. D, completely vulnerable. And E, not sure. So I think not sure is definitely a valid answer in this situation.
Yeah, looking at the results coming in.
Yeah.
Between a couple of different answers here.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to go ahead and close that poll. Thank you very much for participating. And it did look like moderate risk and not sure the biggest responses you got from the audience.
Yeah, and I'm actually surprised that after the slides we just covered, people are choosing A. But and that's possible. There are some organizations out there that have a greater need to protect their data, and you just have to look at your organization and figure out for the data that you have, how likely is that to be monetized? How valuable is it to the bad guys? So if you have financial data, obviously people can get that and do bad things with it. The other thing we're seeing a lot is healthcare data. So it's interesting. There's this sub piece of the network of the internet called the darknet, and you can go out there and you can buy all this stolen data out there. The average cost for a financial record is about $2, according to some recent stats I heard. The average cost for a healthcare record is about 40 or 50, according to the source I had. I thought that was really interesting, but it depends on how you're going to monetize it. All right, moving on. So we've talked a lot up to this point about what are the bad guys doing, what are they up to, how do they go about doing it. Now we're going to shift focus to you and your organization and what can you do to protect yourself. So if you think about cybersecurity just being computer security or network security, a lot of this stuff shouldn't seem new or surprising, I think, to most people. And these slides, the next few slides are going to be pretty busy. I'm going to talk about things at a high level, and the detail in the slides is intended to be a takeaway for you so you can use that after this session. So I'm going to go through these quickly. Let me kick into that. This first one is basically focused on security governance. So when you think of governance, that's basically saying how does the organization understand their risks, understand the needs to address those risks, and they then put in the right design, the right number of people with the right skills in the right places with the right resources to make sure that they have enough and they're focused in the right areas. So that's the assess and the design pieces. And then the monitoring is once you've put that in place, you then as the governing body need to monitor the operational effectiveness of those people and the controls and what they're doing, because just because you have them in place doesn't mean that it's working. And there should be a kind of an annual process or more frequent process to monitor this on an ongoing basis and make corrections as necessary. The next thing you should be thinking about is hardening your systems. So there's a couple of different terms that you hear around this. One is minimum baseline standards or security standards. The left-hand column of this slide gives you some examples of the types of things that is. So for example, a lot of us either now or in the past have had a Wi-Fi router at home. And when you got that, you plugged it in, and it came with an administrator account on it. And so, okay, you get in there and you set it up, and now it's working. A lot of people never changed the password of that administrator account. And so if that's the case, well, every one of those routers that shipped had the same account and the same password. A lot of people got hacked because their neighbor knows what it is, and they can just kind of go in and set things up so they can access your internet as well. So same is true with routers, firewalls, servers. When you get them new, they come with default accounts. You either need to change the passwords or delete the accounts if you don't need them. You need to make sure the second bullet passwords are changed. You need to require strong passwords. Use 2 or 3 factor authentication. We'll talk about that in a minute. And you can zip through the rest of these, but this is just one snip of a longer list of things that you should do before you deploy a new device to make sure that that device is secure before you deploy it. You also need to have a formal exception and review process. So what that means is, and I've seen this a lot with healthcare organizations, healthcare and technology are coming together in some really cool ways. And particularly if you're in a hospital, there's new ways of administering medicine and there's new ways of monitoring patients through different devices that are revolutionizing the healthcare, and that's great for us. But the downside is the people who make those devices, they're trying to accomplish the purpose of what that device is intended to do. So let's just stick with something we all know. It's just heart monitoring, right? So you put on the EKG, it's got that little beep, beep, blip, and now you can plug that into a network, and nurses can monitor your heart rate from the nursing station. They don't have to be in the room to see it. Well, that's awesome. But, and I'm not picking on that device specifically, but for these types of medical devices, they designed it to monitor your heart rate and report it. They didn't think of that becoming a security risk, right? So oftentimes these devices, to enable the network piece of it, they download Linux or a Linux kernel and they embed that into it and they set it up to work. They don't close all those extra ports that we talked about, those 65,000 doors. They don't close all the ones that they don't need and only open the ones they need. A lot of them are open, and there's risks associated to those ports and sometimes services going through those ports that aren't being addressed, and that can be a way for others to go through that device and get into your system. To give you another example, about a year ago, maybe a couple of years now, Target got hacked, and that hit the news in a big way. A lot of records got breached. Well, Target, when they got done looking at what was the root cause and what was behind all that, their servers and their systems and their networks, everything was reasonably controlled and secured, but they had, I don't know if it was a store or an office, but one of their buildings had a heating and air conditioning unit on the roof. And because technology is getting so pervasive, and that's awesome, they, that air conditioning company that maintains that device said, hey, can we plug this into your network so it can feed us real-time information, and we'll get early warning if it's starting to fail? Well, sure we can. Now, how did the hackers get in? They hacked the air conditioning device, and once they had control of that, then they were able to get into Target's network and start doing bad things. So that's what this top bullet on the right is referring to. You need to have a process to say any new device that you plug into your network, it needs to go through a security review. You need to consider what risks it may have. And if it does have those risks, you're not dead in the water, but you may have to do extra things as an organization to mitigate that risk and step around it. Also, this last bullet, the bottom bullet on the right, you definitely want to make sure that you have a list of all the devices you have out there, all the servers, all of the different firewalls, all the heating, ventilation, everything that's plugged into your network. You should have a complete list of it. Because again, remember, the bad guys are doing these scans and looking for open doors. If you have 1,000 devices in your environment, but you only have 900 of them on your inventory, that means that there's 100 that aren't being managed, that aren't being patched and updated, that aren't kept secure. And you only need one open door to get into the building, right? So you got to have a complete list of where all the doors are, where all the devices are. Okay, the next one seems a little straightforward, encryption, but I can give you a little extra twist on this. The picture on this slide, this is called the Enigma device, and this is what the Nazis used during World War II, and it gave them a competitive advantage through a lot of World War II because they could send and receive messages that nobody else could read through use of this device. If those of you who are big war movie buffs, there was a movie called U-571, and it tells a story on how we finally got one of these things, and that kind of ruined their little party they were having with it, and obviously gave us an advantage in the war. The key here, though, is data encryption. Data at rest is a big deal. So wherever you store your data, so that's in your databases or in your storage area networks or the other devices that you keep them on, you want to have them encrypted there. The other place that you'll see data at rest is on laptops, right? The laptops that we all carry out with us. And a California state law is reflective of many states, and it basically says if the data on your laptop is encrypted and it gets stolen, and you may have had millions of records of personal information on there. If it gets stolen and it's encrypted, Well, if the bad guy doesn't have the password, they can't decrypt it. So legally, that's not breached data. It's just a bunch of gobbledygook that nobody can read. So it protects you in that way from a liability perspective, in addition to just protecting the data that you should be protecting. The other piece is you want to make sure that data is encrypted while it's in transit. So if it's going between your data centers, that transmission should be encrypted. And if it's going between you and your customers, you need to have encryption in place. The common protocol that's used is called Secure Socket Layer, it's SSL. And oftentimes in a browser, you can tell if it's encrypted because somewhere on your browser, depending on which one you use, there's usually a little lock icon. If it's open, it's not encrypted. If it's closed in green, then that means that you have a good secure encrypted connection. Also, when you're looking at encryption, both at rest and in transit, you want to consider all forms of data. Most people focus on our production data that we're using to do whatever our company does, but they don't often think about the backups and the archives that we make. Those also need to be encrypted. To use kind of a quickly antiquated example here, we used to back up to tapes. Some people still do, though the use is kind of weaning away. But if that backup tape is not encrypted, you just need somebody to somehow get into your environment, pick up one of those tapes, and they plug it into their own device. Now they have all your data. So the tape needs to be encrypted. If you keep live online backups called archives, those need to be encrypted. And then the second bullet on the left here, key management. When you encrypt it, most people use what we call as a public-private key setup. So there's a public key that everybody can have, and you use your private key, you encrypt something, and you send it with the public key that they have, they can decrypt it, or vice versa. But the point here is you have a key, and that is sort of the key to the lock that unlocks the data. If you don't protect that key, meaning if you have the data encrypted, but the key is stored on the same device in the same location, well, the data might be encrypted, but they also have the piece that they need to decrypt it. So you need to have a key management process and controls in place. The column on the left here, this is just showing the current considered strong encryption algorithms. The ones that we see mostly at our clients are AES 256, or what they call triple DES. It's about 2/3 of the way down the list there, triple DES. In general, you want to make sure that you're using a leading format. In general, when you look at the number of bits, the higher the bit number, the more complicated the encryption is, thereby making things more secure. On the flip side, the higher the bit rate, the more time it takes to encrypt and decrypt. It may not equal a lot of time for any one record or any one little piece, but when you're doing that on an enterprise scale, this becomes a big deal, and it can introduce what we call latency into your system. So what normally, if you provide a system to your customers, they might log on and go, click, click, click as they're moving through. Now it's maybe click, wait, wait, click, wait, wait. It can slow things down. All right, the next area, this really shouldn't be new to most people. This is just managing users in your environment, both at the network layer and applications, databases, operating systems. You should have processes for ensuring that any new access granted, whether it's a new or it's a modified access, that gets approved. And whoever's doing the approving needs to understand what they're approving. The biggest weakness we see at a lot of clients is they'll say, hey, Steve's a new employee here. Can you please give him the same access as Mary because he's doing the same function? Well, Mary may have a lot more responsibility than Steve needs today that she's acquired over time because she's been with the company longer. We may be giving out too much access if we take that approach. So whoever's doing the approving should be thinking about those kinds of things and limiting it to what we call the least access principle. Only give people what they need and nothing more. Even if you're well-intentioned, you may have access to a function, maybe it's a button on the screen that you normally work with. Most of the time it's grayed out, you can't use it. But somehow now you have access to it, it becomes active. You're like, hey, what's that? So you click on it, and you may not have known it, but you just kicked off something that's going to mess things up in a big way, and it's going to be very costly to reverse. So you don't want to give people more access than they need, not because they're going to steal per se, but they just may innocently do the wrong things. Do regular access reviews. And the last bullet here, require strong authentication. Typically that's password controls, right? So all the things that we hate, make them longer, make them more complex. You can't use dictionary words, upper, lowercase numbers, special characters, all that kind of stuff. The more cryptic you can make it, the more secure it is. To a point, there's a valid argument that if you make it too long and too difficult, you're going to weaken your security because people are now going to start writing it down and putting it under their keyboard in their top drawer, and now it's there to be discovered. The better thing from a security perspective is to move to multi-factor authentication. And that's what I mean by 1, 2, 3 factor. The 3 sub-bullets there are the different factors. It's requiring a different mix of things to grant you access to a system. And that could be something you know, like your username and a password, something you have. So a lot of people have those little fob keychain things that change the number every minute. There's now apps on cell phones, smartphones that do the same thing. So that's something you have, or something that you are. So that would be your fingerprint, a retina scan. If you just use usernames and passwords, you're only doing 1-factor authentication. If you're using that and one of those codes that changes every minute, that's 2-factor authentication. 2-factor authentication is getting really smart these days with smartphones. You can have the number that changes every minute. You can have it so that you enter your username and password and then it calls you on your smartphone and you have to hit a button when they answer. A lot of really innovative ways are coming along and they're getting more and more affordable. And that the use of 2-factor authentication really exponentially does good things to your company in terms of security. So I would strongly recommend that. Next up is monitoring your systems. And there's all different types of monitoring. I think I have 2 or 3 slides on this. The first one is logging system events. So all your systems, firewalls, routers, servers, etc., they keep logs of what's going on those devices as long as you have them configured to do so. And so you can look at what's happening, and if people are doing the wrong things, it sends off an alert, you respond to it. Awesome. The next type of monitoring is configurations. So when we talked about the hardening standards before, changing the passwords on the default administrator accounts, removing accounts you don't need, setting up strong passwords, and there's other types of security things that you configure onto those machines. Well, once you go live with them, you don't want them to change over time. So you need to have some tools that monitor just the configurations themselves, and if anybody changes them, you should get an alert. Sometimes it's fine, sometimes it's not, but you definitely should be looking. Oftentimes, a developer will go in and for all the right reasons, they will make some configuration settings, and you can think of it as unlocking some of those 65,000 doors, and they do their proof of concept and everything works and they leave it. Well, now you have unlocked doors, and remember again, you just need one unlocked door to get inside. The next 2 major bullets here, IDS and IPS, intrusion detection and intrusion prevention. These kind of go together. These look at logs of system activities. They look at patterns of network activity. They can look at a lot of different sources, but they're really good at detecting unusual patterns. So for example, 65,000 doors, there's certain doors that email should be sent from, and a different door that email should be received from. So if you have whatever the door is, an email should be going out of your organization through that door, and now you see email coming in through that door, that's a red flag. If you see other types of communication, not email, coming through that door, that's a red flag. So that's an example of what those are. And then the next level of these that are coming out is managed security service providers. So this is taking those same types of monitoring to a new level in that these providers will give you a device that you plug into your network that does the monitoring. The device collects information from the others. It does that IDS, IPS type monitoring that I was just saying, but it also is managed by a third party. So these are companies like FireEye and others. They have a team of security specialists that monitor for the latest threats, the latest virus, the latest exploits, because sometimes there's a lag. Once an exploit becomes known, it may be days before your antivirus system gets the update that lets you now catch it. So they're right on that as quickly as possible, and you know, it's a subscription-based service. You don't just buy it and you're done. You have to then subscribe to the piece that they do, and they manage it from there. But it is a really good way to secure your environment. Now to polling question number 3.
Exactly. So just give your best answer here. What percentage of U.S. companies were successfully hacked in 2015? Was it under 25%, 50%, 60%, 70%, or over 80%? So we want to make sure everybody gets a chance to vote here so you can get your California CE. We did have a question come in about whether this program qualifies for New Jersey CPE credits, and that is incorrect. We're only able to give CE credits within California. So with that, we've had the majority of you vote, so we're going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results.
Yeah, this is interesting. A couple of you thought under 25%, and that's not correct. I'm a little surprised everybody's kind of in the middle there. And this is one of those questions that's really kind of a, it gets you guys going. It's one of those shockers. A Meridian study recently said over 80% of companies were successfully hacked. And if you remember back to my earlier stats slide, spear phishing is a form of hacking, and that study found 84% of companies were successfully spear phished. So, a lot of companies have been hacked. The question is, do they know? Because remember, again, sometimes you click on things, you download the malware, it's running in the background, you don't even know it's there. Or, again, your data can be stolen and you still have it. So if somebody did steal it, how do you know? You need to have these different types of monitoring that we're talking about in place to catch that. So a couple more different types of monitoring, back to monitoring. There's one type that's called data loss prevention. What this does is it looks for different types of data. So for example, with a social security number, it's 3 digits with a dash, 2 digits, dash, 4 digits. Or a credit card, right? 4 and 4 and 4 and 4 with a dash in between. So it's looking for things like that, and it can get even more sophisticated. It can look for addresses and all kinds of personal information. And if it sees that, it can do different things with it. In some cases, it just blocks it. In other cases, if with some logic that's built into it, it knows that you have a business relationship with company X, and you should be communicating that information back and forth. A lot of companies have a system in place where you type confidential in the subject line, and that automatically encrypts it. Well, what if you forgot? This type of tool might detect that, and it knows that you're sharing information with company X who's trusted, so it just goes ahead and encrypts it for you. So it can do that. Or it can suspend it so that somebody else can look at it and decide whether or not that should be going out, and then you work with whoever sent it and you do the right thing. This not only looks at email, I'm using that as an example, but it can also make sure that the same kind of information doesn't get onto thumb drives, or it isn't loaded to cloud storage like Box.com or Dropbox or OneDrive, or there's a lot of them out there. But it just helps you monitor for those types of things and minimize your exposure. Then the last major bullet on here, antivirus. I think that's a relatively easy topic or familiar topic. The key here is to make sure that you're looking holistically at your operation. A lot of people focus on laptops, and that certainly is important. But servers can also be infected, and so you need to get the antivirus for servers. The key here is, and I got bad news for some, Apple iOS has been hacked. Right? Linux has been hacked. There are exploits. It is dramatically less, but you are at risk, so yes, you need to consider antivirus even if you're running those. This slide is basically saying that when you have all that monitoring in place, it's set up to look for things and send alerts. Well, do you have people and process in place to respond to those alerts? And so there's a lot of bullets on here. This is pretty standard for most IT operations. The bullets at the latter half of the list, I think, are also important. You not only need to respond to those alerts, but you also need to step back from time to time, do some trend analysis, get to the root cause, understand why they're happening, and address those so that you're not exposed to that type of risk again. This last section is really important. If you remember some of the earlier slides, there's hacking in the normal ways. The latest is that spear phishing, the whaling, those types of things, and the ransomware. All of those are really tied back to us, people, not machines. We are the weakness, not the machines. And the only thing you can do about us is make sure that we're aware that we don't do things that we shouldn't. So there's organizations out there, and I'm hitting on the bottom bullet here, the last major one, that run anti-social engineering programs. So they'll send you phishing emails, but they're kind of good phishing emails. They're just looking to see if you're susceptible, if people aren't aware and they click on things. I've been caught by these recently. There was one about an org chart, and I'm like, oh, and it's from a client who would give me an email account with them. So, oh yeah, I want to see who's now in different places in the organization. I clicked on it, and rightly, it takes me to a website that says, you've been phished. And it talks about what it is and things that I should be aware of. It's really a very effective way to keep people mindful of this. And you got to send them often. They're getting even more sophisticated with them, where they don't just send you a spear phishing email. They'll send one ahead of time with no link. It says, hey guys, we're a little bit late getting that org chart update out to you. We'll have that this afternoon. And it's coming from somebody who should be doing that. And then later that afternoon, you get the email with the link. That's what got me. I'm like, oh, okay, I've been waiting for this. Clicked on it. Oops, they got me. The stuff at the top is more the normal things. If you want people to be aware of something, you should have posters around your organization, in the break room, things of that nature. Send out emails from time to time. Hey guys, be careful about this or that. The booths, what I mean by that is you can set up like a kind of a career fair thing, but it's more of an awareness thing. And in the booths, you can give away the swag. If you're not familiar with the term, that's stuff we all get. Stress balls, pens, other stuff. So I hear people use the term a lot. Not many people know what it means.
I didn't know that, and I give it away a lot.
So yeah, have a lot of swag and just stuff that they'll look at and go, oh yeah, phishing, yeah, or maybe a little fishing pole that's cute and funny and you can put in your cube or whatever. There's a lot of really smart products out there that you can use. And now we're on to polling question number 4.
All right, last one here. So please do complete this if you'd like your California CE credit. So what types of what types of awareness does your organization have in place to let employees know about phishing and beware of cyber attacks? Does your organization send out emails? Do you have booths and events? Do you have an anti-social engineering program? Posters? Or are you asking yourself, what awareness program? We've never even thought about doing that. So that's the last option there. So we've got, we'll give you just a couple more seconds to weigh in.
Wow.
And it's pretty clear what the groups are doing here. So, okay, if we can go ahead and close that poll. So the big winner is?
So emails is the biggest response here. You can see it's 64%. 34% are like, what awareness program? And a few have had an anti-social engineering, much like the one I was just describing. I'm surprised that nobody on the call, we have over 100-ish. Nobody has booths, nobody has posters. So those are usually part of an integrated program. So interesting. All right, last couple of pieces here. I just got a couple more slides. This one is talking about third-party vendor management. So just like if you remember the example of Target and the heating and air conditioning vendor, there's other vendors that a lot of companies use that provide a service to you, and they connect and interface with your networks and your systems. Before you allow them to touch anything on your network or your system, you have to put them through the same rigor that you would the air conditioning vendor or the medical device person. What types of risks do they have? What types of controls do they have? So there's a whole upfront thing that you need to do before you contract with them. That's the first big bullet here. And then on an annual basis, you need to get a Service Organization Controls Report, affectionately known as a SOC report or a SAS 70, Systrust Web Trust, or you need to go audit them yourself. So that's how you do that and maintain your risk mitigation on an ongoing basis. This next slide, I threw this in kind of at the end. This is throwing out some terms that a lot of technical people will throw at you, and it sounds like it's very sophisticated, and they're really not that sophisticated. And they can kind of mystify you and make you think, oh my gosh, I could not possibly understand what they're talking about. So it's the concept of attack surface or attack vectors. If you look at the sub-bullets there's computers, smartphones, tablets, wearable technology like Fitbits and Apple Watches, and printers, copiers. Every one of these is a different device that could be exploited to hack into your network and your system and take that next step, get to the next level until you get to the data. Every one of those is considered a different attack vector. It's just a different way you can get at the holy grail that you're after. The more of them you have, the concept says the larger your attack surface. The more vectors, the larger your surface. So I hear a lot of security people and a lot of network people use these terms, and I know when I was a younger professional, it used to mystify me a little bit, and once I really learned it, I'm like, oh, well, that's not a big deal. So be aware of that as you work with your security people. If they're using those terms, that's what they're talking about. Consider there's this concept called the Internet of Things, and that's just expanding a little bit on one of the first couple of slides. Everything now is interconnected through Wi-Fi, through networks, coffee machines, refrigerators, all kinds of stuff. Interesting stats at the bottom here. If you look at the stats, they say the world population is going to be 7.7 billion by the year 2020, and a different study is saying there's going to be 6.1 billion smartphones. I'm assuming the 1.5 billion difference are like people 0 to age 3. But my 1-year-old picked up my Apple phone, and she was able to log in, go through, navigate to get to the app, and she knew the app at 1 year old. It really blew me away. Now this next slide, we've talked about a lot of things, and all of that doesn't make sense for all companies. So there's a concept here on how much should we have. What I have here is a chart. On the x-axis, which is the horizontal axis, we're talking about the number of breaches or the amount of security weakness that you could be exposed to or you could experience. And then the y-axis going up is the cost. So if you think about it in terms of security breaches, if one record is breached, that's a bummer. You give them their security monitoring. It's a relatively low impact. The bigger it gets, that cost increases. Once it gets to a certain level, it's getting into the news. Now it's impacting your company, and this line grows exponentially. Now, you could prevent those things from happening. If your risk tolerance as a company is that you can have 0 breaches, if you did, it would impact your company in a big way. You can prevent it, but it's going to have a high cost. So that's on the left hand of the green line here. There's a high cost. The more breaches you can live with, or the more records you can have breached, the lower the cost is to maintain that level. And if you're wondering how much should your organization do, it's right where these lines intersect. This isn't an exact science. It can be, but you could usually sit down and just say, how much can we experience before it gets to a different category of impact to us? Plot those out, and you can find out where those lines intersect. The last topic here, last slide with content. A lot of organizations now are requiring you as a company that when you're audited in particular, this is where I'm seeing it, you have to have a separate memo that discusses your company, what level of cybersecurity risk do you have? Do you have personal information, or do you deal in coal, right? Or are you dealing with mortgages which have your customer's name, address, account numbers, social security? I mean, that's another holy grail of data that people are after. So what is your level of risk? What are the controls that you have in place specifically that address that risk? Have you been attacked? And based on all of that, how do you conclude your level of preparedness is? I see one of the questions that came in, it's asking about cybersecurity insurance. Yes, we certainly recommend that you have it if you need it. It gets back to that, do you deal with data or do you deal with coal? If you need it, you should have it, and you need to work with your legal staff to figure out how much you should have. And that would be something that you include in this memo that you put together. So in summary, we covered all the topics we said we would up front. That's all this slide is basically saying. I have another slide in here where if you're looking for guidance in terms of what in addition might you consider, I've covered about 60 or 70% of what most companies do. There's other things. This top reference from NIST is a cybersecurity framework that's really good. All of these are great resources. So things to consider there. We have a report template from that last slide that we'd be willing to share with you if you're interested in that. And of course, we're always happy to help our clients figure out how to address this risk.
So thank you, Steve. We were right up to the minute here on the webinar.
Ooh.
But if you have additional questions when you hit the exit of the webinar, you can include that in the exit survey. Just jot those down and let us know. And we really appreciate everyone participating in today's webinar. Thank you and have a great day.